Following a controversial meeting that ended close to midnight, they were out there all night. Now, the St. Tammany Parish Council vote decided that voters will have a say in whether a casino opens in Slidell.
Yeah, and as Erica Ferrando shows us, the vote by the council was largely split from representatives from East and West St. Tammany.
Excuse me, and I'd like to publicly object to this process.
After 6 hours of heated debate, the St. Tammany Parish Council voted 8-6 Wednesday to allow voters to decide if they want a casino in Slidell. The parish was mostly divided.
The state delegation, terrible, terrible thing to put something up like this to purposely try to split the parish east and west. And not even have the guts to show up.
The will of the people, unquestionably in this case, is proven to me once again tonight. They want to vote on this.
Most votes in favor came from West St. Tammany Parish. Most against it represent Slidell, where the casino would open.
That's typically what's known as the not in my backyard syndrome.
Ed Chervenek is a political scientist at the University of New Orleans.
Slidell representatives probably hearing from their constituents that they're not interested in having this casino, whereas residents elsewhere in the parish would like to see that revenue generated.
Parish voters will be asked if they want to undo the 1996 vote to ban casino gambling and clear the way for a group called Pacific Peninsula Entertainment, or P2E, to build a $325 million casino resort in Slidell near Lake Pontchartrain.
The voters of St. Tammany should have this opportunity.
The casino would open in Jake Airy's district.
Would there be a different response had it been on the lakefront or by the causeway or in Fountainblue State Park?
He voted against moving forward to a parish-wide vote, but now hopes voters will put their energy into learning more about the project before the biggest vote yet is in their hands.
Frankly, I didn't realize the hundreds of millions of dollars that leave the parish that go to Mississippi. I think they should look at that. I think they should look at what social ills gambling causes and whether that's already here.
Do you think it will pass?
I think it will. I think it'll be 60-40, something like that.
St. Tammany voters will make the call on November 13th. Erica Ferrando, Eyewitness News.
Council Member Jake Airy says people will be able to ask questions and make suggestions whenever the developer starts holding public meetings about it in the coming months.